Yeah. Oh,
what am I buying, Tyler?
So it's buy or sell. It's pretty simple. I give you a take or a question, and you have to decide if you're going to buy or sell on that take or a question. We'll go around the horn with each one, though. Before we do, need to let you know it's brought to you by Jock Market, jockmkt.com. Hybrid between fantasy sports and the stock market. You know, maybe you want to buy low on some Jets. Maybe someone like Pierre-Luc Dubois could get a bit of an elevated role here. Check them out, jockmkt.com. Promo code DFO50 gets you a $50 deposit bonus. I'm not going to start in Canada. We're going to go south of the border where I can't take my eyes off Cale Makar, man. Every time this guy's on the ice, he's impressing me. He's an AJHL boy as well, so I like that. I'm going to go ahead and say he's the best defenseman playing in the playoffs right now. CJ, I'll start with you. You're buying or selling? And if you sell, you got to tell me who you think the best D-man is.
I'm actually buying that one. You know, I think that if he played a full regular season, he'd be the favorite for the Norris. He might still win the Norris. You know, we're all quick to realize on this guy, he was great in the playoffs a couple years ago when he's walking out of, you know, rocking right into the NHL out of nowhere. So yeah, I'm buying that one. I love the Avs. I don't play the gambling game, but if I did, I'd be putting my house on the Avs winning this cup.
Frank?
I'm going to buy as well. Victor Hedman obviously isn't at full strength. There's some really other really good D-men. Shea Theodore, Jacob Slavin's been fantastic in Carolina. But Cale Makar, it's hard to argue with that.
Well, I'll just be different. I'm going to sell, and I'm going to say, because I've watched him a lot, Charlie McAvoy in Boston has been incredible for them in the postseason. I think he's added a lot, and I think, you know, Colorado probably has I think they have a better overall defense core, so McAvoy might be more important to his team because there's a bigger gap where you've got, you know, Graves and you've got Girard and the other guys in Colorado. So I will say Charlie McAvoy, and I love Cale Makar, but man, McAvoy's really impressed me this postseason.
I struggled with how I want to word this next one, but both Edmonton and Toronto need to make some changes. They need to bounce back next season. If you could only buy the stock of one of those two teams heading into next year, which one would you buy? Who do you think has the better chance of bouncing back next season? I'll flip the order. Go to you first, Jason.
Well, I'll go Edmonton because their division. Right? You look at the Pacific Division, there's them and there's Vegas. And then there's a lot of question marks in Calgary and LA and Anaheim and San Jose and the new Seattle Kraken and Vancouver. Whereas Toronto goes back to Tampa Bay and Boston, and their arch nemesis. And so I will say, I think Edmonton will have, they might not necessarily be the better team, but I will pay their stock and they will have a better chance to go farther.
I'm going to take Toronto, and I'm going to say, you know, I think all the reasons you pointed out are really strong. And I think even going back to the Atlantic, it makes it really difficult for Toronto to say that team as currently constituted as a sure playoff team, given the big strides a team like Florida made this year. But I think, you know, CJ pointed out, I think there's going to be some pretty significant changes. Like, you know, I'm just going to throw out a total hypothetical, and there's no reporting to this at all, but what if you were to swap a Mitch Marner in a deal for a Seth Jones, for instance? Like, that'd be something that I think you'd have to be looking at. And I think Toronto has the pieces to make a bigger change this offseason.
And I'm buying Edmonton, guys, just because they have the cap space, you know, and that's sometimes you misspend cap space, of course. So there's a bit of an article of faith here. I'm acknowledging that they're going to make good use of it and bring the right players in. But, you know, I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason for Ken Holland and his staff there with the Oilers. And, you know, as Jason says, just a division set up for more success. I'm probably watching Leafs too closely, too, and I just saw them lose a series they shouldn't have lost. So I'm buying Edmonton for next season.
Since we got the extra insider firepower here, I'm going to ask about some specific players and situations heading into the summer in Buffalo. Sam Reinhart, Jack Eichel, both reportedly on the block. I'm going to say neither are Sabres at the start of next season. Chris, you buying or selling?
I'm going to sell on that one. You know, I think it's going to be hard to move off both of those players. You know, obviously both are in play to a degree. But, you know, here's the thing in the NHL, and it probably frustrates a lot of us. We don't see a lot of huge trades. And the Eichel situation has a lot of nuance to it. But, you know, that's a really difficult trade to make. I'm not saying 100% he's not going to be sold, but I just have trouble seeing both him traded and Reinhart in the same offseason. You know, I just think that might be too much to ask.
Yeah, I'm going to sell, and a lot of it for that reason. I do think Jack Eichel is traded this summer, but I don't think Sam Reinhart is. I go back to a conversation that I had with Don Granato to close out the season, and he was saying, for all the public hoopla about Sam Reinhart and whatever public posturing may be in place, people try and read into his press conferences. He said he was one of the real leaders of that team to close out the year. He's productive, he's young, and I think he's one of those guys that you build around in Buffalo.
Yeah, I got to sell too, because guys, you got to remember Kevin Adams, who, by the way, Jason Strudwick with a classic comparison. He believes that he looks a lot like Les Nessman, which is fantastic, by the way. So anyway, I look at him. He doesn't have a ton of experience yet. Now, maybe they'll bring in Jim Rutherford or someone else, but to make a Jack Eichel trade, as Chris said, that's difficult enough. Then you're going to try to trade Reinhart, and then, Ristolainen piped up and said, hey, if they want to trade me, I'm open to it too. Like that. The opposing GMs are circling every day and calling him to see if, hey, maybe we can pull one over here on maybe a less experienced GM. So I think that Buffalo, I won't be surprised if both of them end up back in Buffalo, because the Jack Eichel injury, well, not injury, but the potential surgery, I wonder how that hangs over the head of other teams. Are they risking wanting to take on that contract without knowing about that? So I'm actually going to sell and say that neither gets moved.
Woo. Well, it's a good buy or sell question when everyone sells on it. The fourth one I got here, similar theme, but I'm going to say one of Johnny Gaudreau or Sean Monahan are traded out of Calgary this offseason. Jason, you can start.
Oh, yeah, I'm buying that for sure. I think, you know what? And I'll say this, Calgary's got to be very careful, because Sean Monahan, up until like the last 10 games of the season, in his draft class, he still had more goals than Nathan McKinnon. I'm not saying he's as good as Nathan McKinnon, but he's had a really consistent career, and he's banged up. It's a COVID year. Like, I know other teams are going to try to buy low on him, and that would be smart, but Calgary's got to be very leery of that. I thought he just had an off season with injuries and COVID and everything. His shooting percentage was in the ditch, and that's not going to continue. So I think one's going to get traded for sure, because I think they've got to change up their core. It's been too much of the same for a long time. Kind of similar to Toronto, but not necessarily just for cap space. I just think they need to make a difference. So I think one's going for sure.
Yeah, I'll buy that as well. And I think for the reasons you mentioned, with Monahan, I think the same in a lot of ways exists for Gaudreau. And I should remind everyone that these are two guys on contracts that are really manageable cap hits that teams can absorb pretty easily. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we're talking about Johnny Gaudreau as a 95-point player, 96-point player in this league. So can he get back to that? I don't think there's any question physically that he's capable and has the skill set to do it. So I think teams are going to be interested, and that's why one of them is going to end up being on the move. But nonetheless, it is a very delicate situation for Calgary, and I think that's why they didn't make any one of those moves last summer.
This is a half-hearted sell, but I just feel like we can't sweep another going the same way. Here's the thing. Both those guys have at least explored the market on them the last 2 summers. A lot of that goes around the league. It's hard to know how close they ever were to anything. Maybe they stay. I'm trying to make it a little different. But if I'm being truthful, I do think it's likely at least one of them does find a new home this summer.
You don't have to watch out for my feelings or anything. You can buy on it if you want to.
I'm just trying to be a little different, make people keep tuning in. There's a reason to keep watching.
The last one, we've had Jarmo Kekalainen on this podcast, and we all know his history too. He's held on to guys like Panarin and Bobrovsky. I'm going to say Jarmo stays stubborn, and he holds on to Seth Jones this summer, and maybe it's a deal at the deadline, but I'll say Seth Jones is staying a jacket throughout the summer. Chris?
I'm slamming the sell button. I'm not even letting the other guys talk on that one. I think he's as good as gone, the way this is all sort of played out publicly, the way things they've been through as an organization, the fact that they're kind of ripping off the Band-Aid, new head coach coming in, JD back in their front office. I think he's gone. I think there's even an outside chance, and I mean very outside, that Zach Werenski, that they have to find out what's going to happen there. But certainly Seth Jones, I think, is gone this summer.
Any fun teams you think, Chris, that he'll go to? Any top contenders?
I don't know. Why not the Oilers? Got his brother there.
Yeah,
really?
Oilers fans have been.
I think actually the 2 cities you guys are sitting close to would be 2 of the teams I think make among the most sense.
Yeah,
Edmonton.
Philadelphia, I agree. That's the one. I think they're going to make a splash. The other team I think is, don't sleep on the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins might try to make a splash, and I'm going to sell too, Tyler. I think they learned from kept Bobrovsky, they kept Panarin. Now, granted, that was a totally different situation. Yeah. They were a team that was competitive that year. They can't go into to a season where Seth Jones says he's going to test free agency, because all that does is every game that passes, I think it lessens his value for the team that acquires him. They think it's a rental. You're going to want a team that can acquire him now, get him into their organization, and hopefully, convince him to want to sign with them, right? Like I wonder if some teams, if you might see Columbus grant permission to a team to talk. So it's almost like a sign and trade situation, because then Columbus can get even more from him. But man, he's going to command a lot. Like, I know some people have tried to twist his numbers around on analytics to suggest he's not that good. I think Seth Jones is a really good defenseman. I think he's top 10 for sure, and might be a top 5. There'll be a long list of teams that want him.
I was just going to say, he's a top 5 defenseman for me. He's gotten Norris Trophy votes from me previously. And more to the point, you guys mentioned Philly and Edmonton. Like, what teams aren't going to be interested in Seth Jones? There's going to be 31 other teams. Now you can include Seattle in the mix. I think teams would move anyone, so to speak, on their roster and create whatever cap space necessary to sign him in order to get a guy like Seth Jones, because you just can't produce guys like that. They don't grow on trees.
Feels like he's been in the league for so long, but it's hard to remember. He's still very young as well, right? Like, he's still only in his mid-20s. That's been buy or sell, clean sweeps on the last few, so I'll crawl back into my cave and reevaluate my question-making process. But it's brought to you by jockmkt.com. Remember that promo code DFO50 gets you a $50 deposit bonus.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty.